Now on Chronicle.
So yes, the American Revolution was won in South Carolina.
How the American Revolution unfolded in South Carolina.
There was battle after battle after battle here in South Carolina.
The bold leaders.
They are risking their lives to make these decisions.
And key events.
Here you can trace a direct line to our victory later on at Yorktown.
That ultimately led to freedom from Great Britain.
Without their bravery, without their perseverance, we would not have prevailed in the Revolutionary War.
This whole place gives me goosebumps.
Plus, the ongoing work to preserve the past.
It's history in our own backyard.
And invite the next generation to step into history.
The American Revolution works against all odds.
Now, Chronicle, Legacy of Liberty.
Welcome to Chronicle. I'm Jane Robelo. 250 years ago, the United States of America was born, a new nation built on the radical idea that all men are created equal. And the journey has been far from perfect, starting with a war that was hard won. But here in historic Brattonsville in York County came a critical win for the Patriots in the Southern campaign. General George Washington was the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army and would later become our first president. Triumphs across the northern colonies come to mind when we're thinking about the Revolutionary War. But over this next hour, we'll explore the significant contributions of South Carolina and efforts underway by the SC 250 Commission to preserve and to promote the Palmetto State's revolutionary history. We mark the birth of America with the date July 4th, 1776. 56 men representing the 13 American colonies took a courageous step, confronting a world power with the power of their quills, signing a document that severed bonds with Great Britain. 4 of those men were from South Carolina. Carol Clark shows us who they were and what they risked for freedom.
We hold these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
That they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights.
That among these are life,
liberty,
and pursuit of happiness.
Lofty, poetic words, but the bottom line in the Declaration of Independence comes a few sentences later.
Whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends,
it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute
new government.
In 1776 colonial America, these were dangerous words.
Well, you signed a document, you were committing treason, and the punishment for treason in the British Empire was death. That was a bold step.
A bold step taken by the 56 men who signed the Declaration of Independence. Among them, 4 men from the wealthiest colony, South Carolina, a colony driven by enslaved labor, indigo, and rice exports. And the men chosen?
They were recognized. They were well educated. They were well spoken. As I said, most of them participated in state or colonial government.
They were trained in law. They would have had a very real understanding of what it is we're putting our names to.
They were Arthur Middleton, Thomas Hayward, Edward Rutledge, and Thomas Lynch Jr.
Now, young Thomas, the one who was born here, third from the left, looking the other way.
Lynch grew up here at Hopsawee Plantation south of Georgetown. His father was a delegate to the Continental Congress, but he'd had a stroke. So Thomas was chosen to take his father's place as a signer of the Declaration of Independence. He was the last to sign, and he did so just a few days before his 27th birthday. Even so, he was not the youngest signee. That was Edward Rutledge. He was a few months younger than Lynch at just 26.
The South Carolina delegates were a little uncertain about voting for independence. And Rutledge saw that it was probably going to carry anyway. He did not want to leave South Carolina kind of hung out to dry, and so he's going to convince the other delegates to vote for independence on July 2nd and then officially on July 4th.
Exceedingly rare. Arthur's signature is just on the lower left there.
One who didn't need convincing, Arthur Middleton.
I think he was brave. I think he was bold. He's noted as being a bit fiery.
He was incredibly wealthy. A rice grower at his plantation, Middleton Place, along the banks of the Ashley River.
It is a totally self-guided tour.
It's home to the oldest landscaped gardens in the country.
Truly one of the most magnificent places I've seen.
They and what's left of the house are still open to the public.
In the old days, like, who all kept this up? Because they did.
It was an estate built on slavery.
People like Arthur and his contemporaries, they would often speak in hyperbole, saying things like, we're slaves to Britain. Well, how deeply ironic to say that you, Arthur Middleton, are a slave to King George when you've got people that you were directly enslaving on your property.
And he had a lot of slaves.
He did.
All four did, including Thomas Hayward, another wealthy plantation owner. He rented his Charleston townhome to George Washington for a week after the war, an Airbnb before Airbnbs. And as a soldier, he put his convictions into action.
He was captured during the Siege of Charleston, so he is sent down to St. Augustine, Florida, where he was sent as a prisoner of war.
So were Middleton and Rutledge.
South Carolina politics can be pretty intertwined. Edward Rutledge married the sister of Arthur Middleton, a fellow signee of the Declaration of Independence. The Rutledges lived across the street from his brother John, who was a co-signer of the U.S. Constitution.
Lynch became the first signer to die. He and his wife were on an ocean voyage for his health in 1779.
They were last witnessed sinking aboard a ship that had no survivors in a hurricane, in the area now that's known as the Bermuda Triangle.
The other three survived the war and continued their political careers in South Carolina.
I think the key is, without their bravery, without their perseverance, we would not have prevailed in the Revolutionary War.
And the job meant putting power, wealth, and influence all on the line with no guarantees, but ultimately setting a revolutionary course for liberty. Their declaration already had blood behind it. The first shots had been fired in Massachusetts more than a year before, in April of 1775. But the Revolutionary War was won not just in those famous northern battles. Here in South Carolina, it was at the Battle of Sullivan's Island in June of 1776 that the Patriots had their first decisive victory over the British Royal Navy. And this area, known as the Backcountry, played a significant role in winning the War of Independence. Here in Brattonsville, Patriot forces defeated the British regulars in 1780, and that was followed by Patriot triumphs in Kings Mountain and Cowpens. Some of the war's most fierce and decisive fighting happened in South Carolina.
The Patriots are essentially over there coming down the Charleston Road.
Will Grimsley brings to life the Revolutionary battles fought here in '96, the Backcountry. He knows the scent of war firsthand.
Just presume the British are in here, and this is the stockade fort of 1781, and we're assaulting in.
The highly decorated Army veteran led troops in Operation Iraqi Freedom, serving multiple combat tours.
You always lay your fire on the enemy side of an obstacle.
Now retired Major General Will Grimsley serves as chairman of the SC-250 Commission. It really brings it to life to stand here in this small space, to see this. It really takes you back 250 years ago.
Yeah, and anytime you can walk on a battlefield, a battleground, and be where people fought and died, lived, yeah, it's a very moving experience.
96 saw the first blood conflict in the Southern Campaign. In November of 1775, James Birmingham of the Long Cane Militia lost his life to the musket ball of a loyalist. South Carolina had crossed into a long and violent struggle.
It's the militia, in each of their forms, in most cases raised from a specific geographic area, that really provide the bulk of the force in the backcountry.
The village of 96, in modern-day Greenwood County, was a critical crossroads for commerce and supply lines. It was about the same size as Charlotte, a significant town in its day.
So there was a little jail here, there were houses down here, there's a tavern, at least one, maybe more than one.
The British moved into the southern backcountry, believing that strong support from locals who were loyal to the British Crown could help them win here. Back here, you're talking about the militia, patriot and loyalist. Sometimes those existential threats came from your next-door neighbor.
Absolutely. I mean, we have stories of fathers and sons who were on different sides of this.
Friends, neighbors, families split over the revolution.
Fire.
More than 200 engagements took place in South Carolina, resulting in nearly 1/3 of the casualties of the entire Revolutionary War.
You had to know who your friends were, and in fact, some people in the backcountry would say, the only person I trust is my trusty rifle.
British commanders developed reputations for violence against the colonists.
Very quickly, Cornwallis and his lieutenants decided that the way to keep these people in line was to show them how brutal we can be. Setting a house on fire and keeping the folks from getting out so they burn alive.
In the Battle of the Waxhaws on the border of North Carolina, American forces attempting to surrender to British Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton were instead slaughtered.
The word went out in the backcountry when a British would try to surrender of, give him Tarleton's quarter.
But the Continental Army combined with Patriot militia and used clever strategies to break the British stranglehold on the South. In 1781, General Nathaniel Greene took his troops to the heart of the British defense, the Star Fort at 96. It lasted 28 days, the longest siege of the entire war.
So he was worried about getting his army trapped here in between the defensive forces of the British and a force moving here.
Greene pulled his forces back, and weeks later the British, worn out, abandoned their last post in the backcountry. How in the world did these 13 colonies defeat the British Crown?
We, I believe the Americans, and certainly in the Southern Campaign, we were patient. We adopted a strategy of exhaustion. We lost more battles than we won, but we won the war.
General Cornwallis may have surrendered in Yorktown, Virginia,
but his army was decimated here in South Carolina, and that is why the role that this state played in winning the Revolution was crucial.
And South Carolina is finally laying claim to that remarkable contribution to independence.
It's about damn time.
And so many revolutionary heroes are still remembered today. 10 of the 46 counties of South Carolina are named for these patriots, including Pickens, Lawrence, and Anderson counties. Also Greenville, which was originally spelled with that E, named for Major General Nathaniel Greene.
Coming up next on Chronicle.
From here, you can trace a direct line to our victory later on at Yorktown.
The South Carolina battle that shifted momentum in the Patriots' favor.
This is our call to inaction, to answer the call of the recliner.
We're getting takeout because we've been out all day long.
It's the 4th of July sale. Enjoy store-wide savings and free design services. Lazy Boy, long live the lazy.
You don't shop for floors in a store. 50 Floor brings a design consultant to your home, shows you every option in your own light, takes precise measurements, and gives you a written all-in price before they leave. Book your free in-home design consultation at 50floor.com right now.
When you're hiring a business for any major purchase or service, trust matters. That's why I encourage you to look for the BBB seal before making a decision. BBB accredited businesses commit to our standards for trust, which includes honesty, transparency, responsiveness, and integrity. They've completed a review process and agreed to uphold those standards. No business is perfect, but BBB accreditation shows a commitment to doing the right thing when issues arise. Before you hire, visit bbb.org and make an informed decision. Better Business Bureau. Trust built locally.
Chevy drivers across America will do a lot in the next 5 years. But one thing they won't do is pay interest on their new Chevy. Just announced, get 0% financing for 5 years on all 2026 Silverado 1500, Equinox, and Trax models, with no payments until after Labor Day. Because you've earned this summer. Now it's time to go get it.
That's the day Chevrolet.
Celebrating America 250.
Over 500,000 homeowners have already trusted 50 Floor with their floors. A design consultant comes to your home, takes precise measurements, and gives you a written all-in price before they leave. Book your free in-home design consultation at 50floor.com right now.
This is our call to inaction, to answer the call of the recliner.
We're getting takeout because we've been out all day long.
It's the 4th of July sale. Enjoy store-wide savings and free design services. Lazy Boy, long live the lazy.
From Sullivan's Island to Utah Springs, so much history lies in the Lowcountry. But as Peyton Furtado shows us, the Battle of Cowpens near modern-day Gaffney was a huge Patriot victory. And it was a key in the eventual surrender of British General Lord Charles Cornwallis.
The sights and sounds of camp in now upstate South Carolina, January 1781. This ragtag group of more than 1,000 professional soldiers, cavalry, and militia, battle-worn from their latest British beating.
They didn't have a shared religion, they didn't have a shared king anymore, they didn't have a shared language in many cases, but they had to figure out how to do something new. And they were thinking about what it meant to be independent as an individual, what liberty meant, and what the hope for the future was.
Little did Patriot Brigadier General Daniel Morgan and his men know everything would change at this small field called the Cowpens.
Cowpens was a major turning point, and it showed that there was enough resistance in the South to make sure that Cornwallis is worn out.
British commander in the South, General Charles Cornwallis, sent his attack dog, Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton, to sniff out rebel rabble. Daniel Morgan had another plan in mind.
They fire 2 volleys, they run to the militia line. They fire 2 more volleys, they run into the woods. So it looks like they've fully retreated.
Tarleton sent his troops, who, mind you, were cold, tired, and hungry, charging up this hill. Little did they know Daniel Morgan's best trained troops were ready just beyond this ridge.
The Patriot cavalry surrounded the British troops.
Tarleton approached him on early morning, January 17th. He came here and he lost. He lost almost his entire army, or it retreated.
And British General Cornwallis soon did the same.
A friend writes him, is he going back to South Carolina? He said, no, I've had enough adventures there.
After the Battle of Cowpens, Daniel Morgan wrote to a close friend saying he gave Tarleton a devil of a whipping. 245 years after that battle, hundreds of people are still reenacting those moments, teaching the younger generations.
This year brought a new record, more than 4,000 people to Cowpens battlefield for the celebration. That's where we met Cash Cook.
Do you guys think you would be good British subjects?
No. I hate kings.
One of the youngest and most passionate reenactors.
If there was no Cowpens, there would be no Guilford Courthouse. If there was no Guilford Courthouse, there would be no Yorktown.
And without Yorktown, America would not be free of British rule. That's why so many people from different walks of life made sacrifices to fight for our independence.
It really preserves our history as a nation, given how in recent times I feel like it's been lost. We haven't valued it as much.
From the ragtag rebels to these rambunctious reenactors.
I think people learning about this now might spark new interest for a whole new wave of people to just keep this alive for a little longer.
We are the United States of America, and that's something to celebrate.
The British victory in North Carolina at Guilford Courthouse cost General Cornwallis about a quarter of his army, and he abandoned the Carolinas. Then, on October 19, 1781, he surrendered at Yorktown to General George Washington. Nearly 2 years later, the Treaty of Paris officially concluded the war.
Ahead on Chronicle, the role of African Americans in the Revolution.
Martha Bratton gives Watt a letter and says, go find Colonel Bratton and let him know the British are essentially coming.
And how one man is working to preserve their history.
Spaces are important, and preserving spaces are important.
Zaxby's has 10 traditional or boneless wings for $10. Toss in 8 signature sauces or 3 bold dry rubs. 10 wings for $10. At Zaxby's, the math is mathing. Unlike the other chicken spots. Zaxby's 10 for 10. Who's got the sauce?
Zaxby's. In this house, it sometimes feels like snacks disappear overnight. I don't even know where these go. Certainly not to me. But with Food Lion's low prices, grabbing extra is no problem.
Okay.
I think the mystery's been solved.
Daddy!
With Food Lion's MVP savings.
Do you want to join the cookie club too?
Yes! There's always room for more. More savings on more favorites at Food Lion.
We're here for those who build America. Those who believe that giving everything we've got today will pay off tomorrow. Who will drive America forward for 250 years to come. If that's who you are, you should pay what we pay.
Now with employee pricing, save up to $10,013 on select F-150s, the best-selling full-size pickup in the Carolinas.
From scorching heat to powerful storms, summer weather can change your plans quickly. Stay ahead with the area's only certified most accurate forecast.
And we are just baking in this heat.
The WYFF News 4 Weather Team, keeping you prepared all summer long.
Whisper Outdoors' biggest Independence Day sale in history, celebrating 250 years of the USA. American-made hot tub starting at $22.99. Save big with swim spas from $12,999. Plug-in power spas with easy setup and no special wiring. Whisper golf carts as low as $59.99. Whisper UTV starting at $69.99. With in-house financing, everyone's approved. 60 months, no interest financing with zero money down. American-owned and operated. Celebrate our 250th anniversary at Whisper Outdoors Independence Day sale. Go to whisperoutdoor.com.
WYFF News 4, live local breaking news.
In 1776, the majority of people living in South Carolina were black. They were enslaved Africans brought to work the rice and the indigo plantations. Their blood, sweat, and toil helped build a state and a nation. Carol Clark with the story of a man who honors their work and sacrifice even in his sleep.
You can read history. You can watch history.
Yeah, you can see them down here also.
But being in a place is a powerful way to experience history.
Adaptive reuse is what this was a part of.
Just ask Joseph McGill. A visit to Anne Frank's World War II hiding place in Amsterdam changed his life.
I was seeing it. I was experiencing it. That made me realize that spaces are important and preserving spaces are important.
Joseph became a historic preservationist, a Civil War reenactor, and in 2010, he started sleeping in slave dwellings.
I had to convince them that it was all about preservation and bringing attention to these spaces that are still on the landscape.
The idea is very simple. Joe had simply asked if he could spend the night in a slave dwelling. He'd bring a pillow, he'd bring a sleeping bag, he'd lay them out on the floor. He wanted to experience what his ancestors had experienced, in the dark, with no distractions.
So I thought about mothers giving birth to children in those spaces, and the laws of that period saying that child belongs to the enslaver, and that enslaver could do with that child as he wished. I thought about folks who would be thinking about running away.
Joseph spent 2 nights sleeping in slave dwellings at historic Brattonsville in York County. And from the beginning, his sleepover idea took off.
And then from that point, a lot of other folks started kind of seeing the value in it and wanting to do it.
So Joseph started the Slave Dwelling Project. In the 16 years since, he slept in at least 150 slave dwellings in 25 states and the District of Columbia. Dirt floor cabins, brick kitchen houses, wood plank shacks, the plantation house too, to remember the house slaves. And wherever he goes, Joseph looks for signs of the ancestors.
Those are strikes.
Axe marks in the hand-hewn beams, even finger marks in handmade bricks. And Joseph McGill always looks for the names of the enslaved. Here at the Enslaved Ancestral Burial Ground at historic Brattonsville, there are 481 markers on graves. There are no names, except for 2, those of Watt and his wife, Polly. Watt, one of the many black men and women who played a pivotal role in the Revolutionary War. He was a teenage slave in the household of Colonel Bratton, a patriot. Bratton was away when the British loyalists came looking for him.
Martha Bratton gives Watt a letter and says, go find Colonel Bratton and let him know the British are essentially coming.
Watt leapt onto a horse and went in search of the colonel. The colonel's wife, Martha, refused to tell the British where they could find her husband. They held a reaping hook to her throat and threatened to cut her, but still she refused. All of her hope was riding with Watt. Watt delivered the message. The Patriot militia raced home and defeated the British in a 15-minute battle called Huck's Defeat. It was a significant victory. It united backcountry patriots, and it paved the way for later patriot victories. And it happened because of what?
Our job is to honor them, to tell their stories. I hope we're telling the stories the proper way.
That's something Joseph McGill understands. Over the years, the project has become more than sleep.
The sleepovers evolved until into not only doing the sleepover, but the campfire conversations before the sleepover. That's where the power is.
The power to bring the contributions and sacrifices of a people alive, to ensure what the slaves did for this nation is never forgotten. What do you think the ancestors would think of your project?
I think the ancestors are smiling on me and the project and anybody else associated with ensuring that it prospers. I think they would be proud.
Proud of a man who helps preserve the past, one night at a time.
Historic Brattonsville keeps close ties with the descendants of the slaves who worked here. The markers for the 480 unknown graves are made of weathering steel, which gets stronger as it ages. It's symbolic of the strength and endurance of enslaved people.
Ahead on Chronicle.
The Catawba wind up being the only Native American tribe that fought on the Patriot side.
Native Americans in the 18th century were fighting their own battle for sovereignty as the war raged on.
There's things that happened in this moment that continue to impact us today.
This is where we live, with hidden gems to be explored, and back roads we know by heart. It's small town America, and progress in action. Every corner with a story to tell, as unique as the landscape itself. This is where we live. These foothills and mountains we call home. And this is where you'll find us, sharing your stories of hard work and faith, tough moments and resilient strength, rooted in the community we share. Proud to be here for what comes next. WYFF News 4.
This is our call to inaction, to answer the call of the recliner.
We're getting takeout because we've been out all day long.
It's the 4th of July sale. Enjoy store-wide savings and free design services. Lazy Boy, long live the lazy.
Chevy drivers across America will do a lot in the next 5 years. But one thing they won't do is pay interest on their new Chevy. Just announced, get 0% financing for 5 years on all 2026 Silverado 1500, Equinox, and Trax models, with no payments until after Labor Day. Because you've earned this summer. Now it's time to go get it. That's the day, Chevrolet.
Live local breaking news, weeknights at 6 and 11.
This is our call to inaction, to answer the call of the recliner.
We're getting takeout because we've been out all day long.
It's the 4th of July sale. Enjoy store-wide savings and free design services. Lazy Boy, long live the lazy.
In a war-torn land, loyalist and patriot forces both turned to the native people. But the ultimate goal of the tribal leaders of the Catawba and the Cherokee nations was to maintain their own independence from these settlers who were encroaching on their land. Caitlin Ashbaugh shares the voices of their descendants who tell their own story of sovereignty.
From southern Appalachia to the Piedmont, survival was protection of place in a world crowded with chaos.
The sense of place and our sense of belonging, the things that Cherokee folks hold dear to them that would have enabled those decisions.
So this is the gourget or gourget. It was like a gift as a thank you from the United States government. It was when we only had a few tribal members left in our communities, we still offered up some of our braves to serve. But we would only fight when we wanted to and if we thought it was worth it.
Aligning with opposing sides, the Cherokee with the British and the Catawba with the Patriots. Warriors, scouts, and traders were essential. in dozens of revolutionary skirmishes.
We know that women would have been at the table.
Theirs was a matrilineal society where tribal women decided when and how they fought.
Catawba played a really big role in the first battle in South Carolina, the first foundational battle. That's the Battle of Sullivan's Island on June 28, 1776, with the British arriving from the coast and the Cherokee pushing downwards. The Patriots had very little success when they went to the Cherokee and asked them to understand this whole revolt. And so the Cherokee were solidly allied with the British at that point.
If they won, they would of course honor the reservation and the treaties, which the British were kind of breaking at the time. They would promise fair trade. They were enrolled as regular militia, got regular militia pay. In fact, the way we know, we have the names of 50 Catawba who we know served in the Revolution. And the Catawba wind up being the only Native American tribe that fought on the Patriot side from the beginning to all the way to the end of the war.
Tattoos were a prominent feature among Cherokee leaders and warriors, typically to identify a new life chapter or personal identity. The black snake was a protection symbol etched into Catawba heritage. It was one of many ways the tribe showed their pride while serving in the Continental Army.
Between the Catawba and the Cherokee, there's a lot of talk about all the warfare that happened between those two tribes, but it wasn't always warfare.
In between the 8-year conflict, tribes sought the preservation of homeland for their people.
It was constantly a source of disruption for them. They have to go further afield in their hunting grounds because they have people living on their hunting grounds now. The names of the Cherokee headmen.
Treaties promised a fair deal. The Treaty of DeWitt's Corner, signed in 1777, being the last large surrender of Cherokee lands.
This ends any issues we have together, and that the hatchet will be buried. The scribes signed the names of the Cherokee headmen, and then they would make a little symbol to show their signature. All of what we know now is Anderson, Oconee, Pickens, and Greenville counties.
Even with the Patriot victory, what followed was broken trust. Generations of native lands disappearing.
This shows the original boundaries of Cherokee ancestral land. It's like a dot, like basically right here.
A devastating shift.
The reservation was 144,000 acres.
Felt across state lines.
600 and something acres to live on.
Through crucial studies and commemoration,
the Catawba have never been honored in one place for their service. If we don't, then they could be lost.
Accounts challenge how we believe the war unfolded.
I'd like folks to rethink what they think they know.
Where stories were once silenced.
Historically, it was pretty much a white man's story, wasn't it?
An opportunity rises to rewrite what's been told.
We're often painted as victims, but in those moments, there was intentional decisions being made to ensure the safety and protection of our people.
Outside of bloody battles rooted in the soil of ancestors,
the land just becomes a part of who you are.
Is a homeland and a beating heart, telling a story of survival.
We have this really deep connection, no matter who holds the title.
Both the Catawba Nation and the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians have secured permanent reservation land through Federal Land Trust. The Catawba's historic headquarters provides a popular spot for visitors to learn about the tribe's contributions. And the appeal of the casino has helped fuel Cherokee, North Carolina, from an under-resourced population to a thriving tourism destination.
Coming up next on Chronicle.
She grew to be a heroine here. She was called the Heroine of Cowpens.
The influence of South Carolina women in the Revolutionary War.
That courageous, the boldness to just go out there and risk herself for someone else.
You don't shop for floors in a store. 50 Floor brings a design consultant to your home, shows you every option in your own light, takes precise measurements, and gives you a written all-in price before they leave. Book your free in-home design consultation at 50floor.com right now.
Listen to the heartbeat. Chevy drivers across America will do a lot in the next 5 years. But one thing they won't do is pay interest on their new Chevy. Just announced, get 0% financing for 5 years on all 2026 Silverado 1500, Equinox, and Trax models, with no payments until after Labor Day. Because you've earned this summer. Now it's time to go get it.
That's the day Chevrolet.
When you're hiring a business for any major purchase or service, trust matters. That's why I encourage you to look for the BBB seal before making a decision. BBB accredited businesses commit to our standards for trust, which includes honesty, transparency, responsiveness, and integrity. They've completed a review process and agreed to uphold those standards. No business is perfect, but BBB accreditation shows a commitment to doing the right thing when issues arise. Before you hire, visit bbb.org and make an informed decision. Better Business Bureau. Trust built locally.
Over 500,000 homeowners have already trusted 50 Floor with their floors. A design consultant comes to your home, takes precise measurements, and gives you a written all-in price before they leave. Book your free in-home design consultation at 50floor.com right now.
Women had a much more significant role in the fight for independence than you might find in history books. Courageous women like Kate Berry and Dicey Langston. Sydney Shadracks now with the way their stories continue to inspire us today.
A winding path at Walnut Grove Plantation leads from a white farmhouse to a small, shaded cemetery. Chris Budno remembers the first time she walked this path very well.
I started walking down the wagon road to the cemetery, and that's when it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I cried like a little baby.
Because for Budno, coming to Walnut Grove Plantation is almost like coming home.
I walked in and they brought me to the house, and it was just, standing there taking it all in was just very heartwarming.
Those who stood in this house hundreds of years ago are her family.
It's a little bit surreal. I'm very proud of this family.
And Budno has reason to be proud. In 1781, Margaret Catherine Berry, or Kate Berry, walked through this house and rode through this farmland on a very important mission.
She grew to be a heroine here. She's called the Heroine of Cowpens.
Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton and the British were making their way to Cowpens with 1,000 troops. Brigadier General Daniel Morgan and his militia were outnumbered, and that's when Kate Berry took action.
She knew where to go to gather up the militia. She knew all of the farmers in the area, and when she needed to go get them, that's what she did.
So when the battle started on January 17th, Daniel Morgan was in charge of 1,600 militia, and Cornwallis and Bannister Tarleton only had 1,000.
Morgan and the Patriots ultimately victorious.
She actually did do that and contributed in such a significant way. How could I not be proud of that?
Hello, it's me.
Fast forward 245 years from the Battle of Cowpens to downtown Greenville. The stage is set for a special performance.
It really started from a place of wanting to partner together to bring awareness to this incredible historical figure from Traveler's Rest.
For many, her name is familiar.
My given name is Leodicia Langston, but everyone just calls me Dicey.
She was a big part of just growing up here. You just knew who she was.
And her story, inspirational.
She was a spy, which is kind of cool. And she was a teenager, and she basically took information as a woman. People kind of chat around you and don't think that that's something they need to keep on the secret. And so she took that information and helped save a number of individuals and kept them safe.
This is my story.
Which is why an entire piece of music was composed to honor the contributions of Dicey Langston, with young women teenagers from the upstate helping write and even narrate the piece.
As a 15-year-old girl, sometimes you're in a space of feeling a little bit insecure, but this is a story that helps us feel connected to bravery and courage.
Bravery and courage, traits of Dicey Langston's that even today she's cultivating among young women. Hundreds of years later, reminding women to take a chance.
I think she's a model of courage. Some people call her Daring Dicey, so that courageous, the boldness to just go out there and risk herself for someone else.
A statue in Traveler's Rest.
She's just beautiful. She's in motion. She has this beautiful cape.
A reminder of the role she played in our nation winning its independence.
And you can definitely see the idea that she's in action and she's making things happen.
And a way for all women to see themselves in our country's heroes.
Seeing these women who paved the way, a very tangible way that they kind of set us up, I think that kind of adds to the excitement that we can kind of do that again for the next generation.
For some, the blood truly runs deep.
Her role in helping win the Revolutionary War is real, and that blood is running through me.
The similarities seen in generations of strong women.
The rest of us, we're Margaret Catherine.
And the stories that are shared as we take a walk through time, a reminder of the power of the female spirit.
And there are so many stories of brave revolutionary female heroes that SC 250 established Founding Mother's Day. Governor Henry McMaster proclaimed its observance each year on the Monday after Mother's Day.
Still to come on Chronicle.
Do you want to be able to walk where your ancestors walked?
Protecting the places where revolutionary history unfolded.
They lived in the swamps. They traveled on the rivers.
And inviting visitors to come explore.
This is our call to inaction, to answer the call of the recliner.
We're getting takeout because we've been out all day long.
It's the 4th of July sale. Enjoy store-wide savings and free design services. Lazy Boy, long live the lazy.
Whisper Outdoors' biggest Independence Day sale in history, celebrating 250 years of the USA. American-made hot tubs starting at $22.99. Save big with swim spas from $12.99. Plug-in power spas with easy setup and no special wiring. Whisper golf carts as low as $59.99. Whisper UTV starting at $69.99. With in-house financing, everyone's approved. 60 months no interest financing with zero money down. American-owned and operated. Celebrate our 250th anniversary at Whisper Outdoors Independence Day sale. Go to whisperoutdoor.com.
The day my daughter was hit by a truck was the worst day of my life. She was just riding her bike, and in an instant, our lives changed. I didn't know if she'd make it. I was scared, lost, and I didn't know who to call. I called George Sink Injury Lawyers. They listened, they cared, and they fought like it was their own child, and got us $1 million. When it feels out of your hands, call all nines.
Celebrating America 250.
This is our call to inaction, to answer the call of the recliner.
We're getting takeout because we've been out all day long.
It's the 4th of July sale. Enjoy store-wide savings and free design services. Lazy Boy, long live the lazy.
Historians credit South Carolina with more battles and skirmishes than any other colony. And yet only a handful of those sites are well known. Stephanie Trotter shows us how the state is working to find and preserve hundreds of others, unearthing the history that's right in our own backyard.
Right here, you know, this is part of the Colonial Road.
The past unlocked
275 years ago
in Lawrence County.
This is an important site.
5 miles from downtown Clinton.
This whole place gives me goosebumps.
A once bloody battlefield is revealing its secrets.
And we're also walking where one of the greatest slaughters of the Revolutionary War happened.
December 1780. Loyalists are plundering the backcountry of South Carolina. George Washington's second cousin, William Washington, is told to keep the British at bay.
We cannot fathom the violence that was here in the backcountry. Homes burned, people murdered, people hanged, you know, your children and yourself being turned out of your house, you know, sometimes with only your underclothes on.
The store was over in that general vicinity over there.
Washington tracked the Tories to Hammond's old store.
And 80 Continental Light Dragoons.
It sat here on a colonial road thousands traveled.
A lot of activity on this road. This was the interstate.
Linking Augusta to Philadelphia.
He came up with them at Hammond's old store.
Historian Rick Wise reads a 16-year-old soldier's account
when we came in sight
of the surprise attack.
Colonel Washington and his dragoons gave a shout, drew swords, and charged down the hill like madmen.
Within minutes, the battle was over. Patriots seeking payback.
Of the 250 loyalists who were here at this store, 150 of them were killed or wounded. 40 of them were captured.
Not a single patriot was lost. Historians say the hundreds of strikes like this on South Carolina soil tipped the scale of the war.
Because they couldn't shake loose from South Carolina, that is really the significant aspect of why the war was won here.
Yet time has buried these smaller skirmishes, musket balls and buttons, buckles and powder horns. Archaeologists confirmed the Hammond Old Store site less than 5 years ago. This team is now preserving it, along with SC-250, the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust, American Battlefield Trust, and local groups.
History is about people. And when we bring people to a place like Hammond's Old Store, we want them to come and walk in the footsteps of our forebears.
As all of the groups work together in the coming months, the hope is to turn this into this. We're at Hanging Rock Battlefield near Camden. It opened last fall with walking trails and historical panels showing how what happened right here helped America win her independence.
Visitors can walk the trail of Patriot troops ambushing British camps, explore the water source vital for soldiers' survival, and learn how future President Andrew Jackson served as a young boy.
The first thing out of people's mouths usually is, "I had no idea." And you've just given them a key.
Molly Fortune leads SC-250, which has spent $2 million in taxpayer money to purchase and protect these hidden war sites.
I want sites to draw people off the highway and into this amazing communities that we have across South Carolina, which are majority rural. And by the way, the majority of all these battles happened in these rural counties.
Hammond's Old Store is one of 100 projects Mike Tyler is developing for public use.
Because we do want the people who are interested in history and the Revolutionary War, but we also want the people out walking their dog, going on picnics with their family.
Walking in the footsteps of a fight for freedom.
We're preserving this for future generations. 50 years from now, I want my great-grandkids to be here learning about this battle. And they can do that because we're going to pave the way for them.
Repaving the path of everyday men and women whose courage and grit made us Americans.
Paths carved hundreds of years ago have been turned into digital trails. The SC-250 Commission is now inviting you to go beyond the popular landmarks and to explore the lesser-known gems of history. Nigel Robertson takes us to the PD region, where the legacy of one of South Carolina's most celebrated sons is right at your fingertips.
This is the Swamp Fox, a wooden wonder named after South Carolina's Revolutionary War legend. This roller coaster gives you breathtaking views of Myrtle Beach, but hold on tight and don't blink. Experiencing the twists and turns along the way helps you feel the story, kind of the same way this does. 80 miles inland are numerous spots the Francis Marion Trail Commission hopes you will stop and see.
I've always been very fascinated with South Carolina history.
Mark Bayek is part of the team behind the Francis Marion app that tells the story of the warrior known as the Swamp Fox, guiding people some 250 years later.
The General Assembly in 2005 created the Francis Marion Trail Commission, and the purpose was to come up with a trail of Francis Marion sites, but also involved, the study of Francis Marion.
Those sites now part of a trail where this app serves as your guide, supported by the Convention and Visitors Bureau, taking you across the PD region where you can study his story yourself. When you look at South Carolina, 250 years ago, how important is it that you tell the story of Francis Marion?
This area was a part of Francis Marion's campsites that he used during the American Revolution.
It does tell the story. When you're standing on the riverbank or you're standing in the swamp, you realize that 250 years ago, this is how they lived.
Rick Wise has studied everything there is to know about Francis Marion.
Marion's role during the American Revolution was critical. I was fortunate enough to be one of the folks that was editing the Francis Marion papers. And with the Francis Marion papers, he would always put up there where he was and when he was writing the letter.
That knowledge helped the Trail Commission locate and mark the very spots where history took place. The spots where Marion, years after serving as captain at the Battle of Sullivan's Island, was able to convince men who weren't part of the Army.
Because he realized that militia were not regular troops. And what they needed to do was be reinforced by the fact that they could take care of their families.
To pick up a weapon and fight.
Francis Marion was able to mold them into an outstanding fighting outfit.
In 1780, after Charleston fell to the British and those soldiers moved west, Marion organized a small band of everyday men to fight back.
He was the only organized force east of the Wateree River at that time opposing the British.
They used the swamp as their cover, disrupting British communications, catching the enemy by surprise.
He struck terror into Loyalist and British hearts,
literally keeping the British from advancing and taking the South. Some say that is how Francis Marion got the name Swamp Fox. British Lieutenant Colonel Bannister Tarleton saying he was an old fox, impossible to catch in the swamps. It's those battles, those campsites, the very spots that people drive by daily, now permanently marked through GPS-enabled itineraries and immersive audio tours.
The app will tell you how to get there and then tell you the story.
There's a whole section of Francis Marion's story that this trail can't show you, his hometown, where he lived before and after the war. That's because it's buried under Lake Marion, the very lake that bears his name. With so much story to tell and so many places to tell it, tourism officials believe this is a perfect step.
Well, because we're in an age where people don't pick up a book and study and say, I want to go there.
But they hope they will pick up their phones and do just that, learning about the South Carolinian who became a brigadier general and helped win the war for independence.
It's part of a larger movement by SC 250, promoting the more than 200 historic sites and more than 600 markers all across the state, commemorating significant events in the American Revolution.
Next on Chronicle.
I'm so hopeful that I can help people gain freedom again.
Bringing history to life.
And it's so exciting to see these kids develop a character.
For the next generation.
I can't believe we won the biggest victory at the Battle of Cowpens.
You don't shop for floors in a store. 50 Floor brings a design consultant to your home, shows you every option in your own light, takes precise measurements, and gives you a written all-in price before they leave. Book your free in-home design consultation at 50floor.com right now.
We're here for those who build America. Those who believe that giving everything we've got today will pay off tomorrow. Who will drive America forward for 250 years to come. If that's who you are, you should pay what we pay.
Now with employee pricing, save up to $63.19 on select Broncos and $39.17 on select Bronco Sports, only at your Carolina Ford dealer.
Wake up and watch WYFF News 4 today.
Whataburger's coming in hot with a bold new chicken sandwich. We start with tangy red pepper cheese, topped with our new crispy chicken breast, and drizzled with sweet hot honey. It's the new Hot Honey Crisp What a Chicken Sandwich. Just don't get lost in the sauce. Savor it for a limited time at What a Burger. Come one, come y'all.
Over 500,000 homeowners have already trusted 50 Floor with their floors. A design consultant comes to your home, takes precise measurements, and gives you a written all-in price before they leave. Book your free in-home design consultation at 50floor.com right now.
With the celebration of our nation's founding, today's students aren't just learning their country's history, they're stepping into it. In January, 250 students from across South Carolina took part in Liberty Day at the state capitol, taking them into the seats of the state's lawmakers.
We want them to get excited. We want them to learn as much as they can because they're going to be our future legislators, our future historians, and our future community leaders.
The one-of-a-kind experience transformed the State House into a living classroom, featuring interactive lessons on the people and the places who shaped the Revolutionary War. The South Carolina State Fair got in on the SC 250 action as well, with its first Revolutionary War exhibit, encouraging fair visitors to stop in for a fascinating bite of history and add their own John Hancock to a giant replica of the Declaration of Independence.
The British are coming, they're coming.
Lessons are getting creative inside of classrooms too. Leah Phillips takes us to Cherokee County for one school's annual tradition, the Revolutionary War Wax Museum.
Just under 10 miles from where the historic Battle of Cowpens was fought, students here at Grassy Pond Elementary are learning about events that happened nearly 250 years ago. And now, each and every day, the next generation walks the hallways just like this, finding creative ways to take stories from the past and bring them back to life.
On Christmas night, 1776, my army and I did something very brave. We had to cross the icy river. I'm glad that it pushed for liberty, justice, and women's rights.
Unless we remember the sacrifices of all of those patriots who fought and died or were willing to die, then we have lost what the roots of America were and how we gained our independence.
Those roots run especially deep here in the soil where the Revolutionary War was fought. And every history lesson waters the minds of students.
We just wanted the students to see how important that not just South Carolina, but this area was in the Revolutionary War.
Which led teachers to seek new ways to get these young minds interested in our nation's history.
This makes it memorable, it makes it stick.
Trading textbooks.
I was in the Continental Congress.
For tricorn hats. These fourth grade students are their own living history lesson.
You get to talk about how your character is feeling and how it's doing instead of reading a book.
You get to put it on and just feel like you're in the Revolutionary War for the first time.
Encouraging curiosity about stories of the past.
And I'm so glad I can bond with somebody and join to them.
The Declaration of Independence.
And helping students understand what life was like at the birth of our country.
To help stop Texas.
The first students that did the Wax Museum are in the 12th grade now. And I have students that will come up to me and tell me that they remember their Wax Museum.
Because it makes history fun and make it very special to do.
And they will remember that forever. Some of these, in 30 or 40 years, hopefully will be doing what I've been doing when I'm not able to do it anymore.
No doubt this great experiment in democracy will continue to test our ability to outgrow our flaws and fulfill the founders' vision of liberty and justice for all. Thank you for joining us for Chronicle, Legacy of Liberty. And we hope that this look at the many shoulders on which we now stand is an encouragement to each one of us to guard those principles of what it means to be an American. I'm Jane Robelo. Good night.